Hi, I'm Kendall Kelton, and I'm your host today on The Rough Draft. Featuring honest conversations with folks from across the creative industry, The Rough Draft explores the creative process, tools, and resources used by some of the best in the business. From journalists to content creators and business leaders, we shed light on what it looks like to break into the industry, make mistakes, collaborate with others, and the essential tools that help us all along the way. This week, I'm excited to be talking with Hannah Williams, the creator and host of the viral online interview series, Salary Transparent Street, where she asks people what they do for work and how much they make. Hannah's goal is to combat discriminatory tendencies in employment, normalize pay transparency, and close pay gaps. And in 2 years, her interviews have achieved over 1 billion views, and her account has gained nearly 3 million followers across TikTok, Instagram, and YouTube. And on today's episode, Hannah's going to tell us the surprising way she became a content creator and the impact Salary Transparent Street has had. Well, hi, Hannah. Thank you for joining. Oh my goodness. I'm so excited to have you on the show. Let's get to it. I want to start with the origin of Salary Transparency Street. And, why did you decide to interview perfect strangers about their salaries on the road?
So I call it my series of unfortunate but then fortunate events. So the gist of it is I found out that I was underpaid before becoming a content creator. I used to be a government contractor. I live in the DC metro area, so government work, very prolific around here. So that was what I did. And I was a data analyst on a contract, and I found out that I was underpaid about $25,000 compared to other people doing the exact same thing I was doing. And I was pretty young in my career. Like, I graduated college in 2019. So I was, still starting out. But really early on, I realized how important transparency was because secrecy had already held me back $25,000. I ended up, interviewing at another job. And in the interview, the recruiter asked me, "What are your salary requirements?" And I was like, I feel like this is the question that got me in this predicament to start with, because how am I supposed to guess what your budget is? Like, I have no way of knowing that. And this ended up playing out in real time, very importantly, because I asked the recruiter, I decided to flip it on her, and I was like, "What's the budget for this role?" And I had been prepared to ask for about $105,000. That was $15,000 more than I was making, but I still knew I could make 25. I just didn't want to rock the boat. So I was ready to ask for 105. But when I asked her for the budget, she told me it was 115. So I was like, that sounds great. That's what I'm looking for. And I was grateful for the transparency because it helped me earn not only what I knew I was worth, but $10,000 extra that they weren't going to give me if I had asked for 105. So I realized, transparency is really powerful. And how are we supposed to know what we're supposed to make if nobody talks about it? It's a very simple concept. And so I started making videos on my personal account. I started talking about how much I made, and it was getting a lot of traction. So I just had this idea. I was like, why don't we just go on the street and ask strangers? And if one person sees a video, one video, we didn't plan on making it a whole venture. It was just kind of a hobby to start. And we decided to go to Georgetown in Washington, D.C. and ask people what they do for a living and how much they make, and posted the same video we filmed that day, that night on our new account with 0 followers, like first video on a brand new page. And it went overnight viral. Like, I remember waking up and it had over 1 million views, and we had like 30,000 followers on TikTok. And I'm like, what is happening? Like, this is crazy. And long story short, I ended up quitting my job 3 weeks after that first video. My husband, who was the one who started it with me, he followed me about a month later. And we've been traveling the country, hopefully the world next year, going around and interviewing strangers about what they do and how much they make.
How has the response been as you've continued to nurture these interviews, especially as you're now you're going to different cities?
I mean, it's been fantastic. We're going on our 3rd year this upcoming April. So, I wouldn't be here today if the feedback wasn't good. Our business has made over $1 million last year. We're on track to make the same amount, if not more, this year. So we're doing really good. This is important information that I think a lot of people needed and didn't know, was something that It's very simple, but it's helpful for everyone.
So to that point, how has your understanding of pay transparency in the US, how has it evolved since starting this work a few years ago?
Yeah, I mean, when we started less than 3 years ago, it was still really taboo to talk about how much you made, but now it's normalized and there's a lot of accounts doing the same thing. And I like to think that the ones that are overseas are, trying to loosen people up for me when I come, because I've heard that Europeans are a little bit more shy about their pay.
Have you gotten any feedback from brands or from other companies around this work? Have you had any feedback from these companies who maybe weren't as willing? Maybe they are now. Maybe they're interested in working with you.
I think it's all about culture. All companies are unique. They all have their own culture and management. I think companies that were not willing to be transparent prior to our work are probably still not likely to be transparent today. And at the end of the day, it's a choice. Companies are not, it's not like it was impossible for them to put transparency in their job descriptions before we started our page. Our page has just made transparency more aware to workers, and now workers are pressuring companies to be more transparent. So I think companies have a lot of work to do with their internal values and their culture and how they approach transparency. I would like to say that it's been really positive, but ultimately companies are still the gatekeepers of this information. And since it helps their bottom line to pay people less, there hasn't been a lot of positive movement in that area. But that's the reason that we have pay transparency laws, which I'm really thrilled for the work that we did. We were invited to testify in support of 3 pay transparency laws in Maryland, Virginia, and the state of DC. DC and Maryland both passed. We were invited to watch the bill get passed and signed in Maryland. So we've been very involved in legislation efforts as well. The bill in Virginia was vetoed at the last step by our governor, which was no surprise, but it's not dead. So there's still work to be done. And nationwide, there's tons of states that are passing pay transparency legislation January 1st of 2025 and other months down the road in 2025 as well. So there's at least 7 new states that are passing pay transparency laws that are going to mandate companies to list transparency in the job description, whether they want to or not.
Can you talk a bit more about kind of that kind of whirlwind and how and kind of where y'all are kind of seeing yourselves currently in these like legislative talks? Like, what is your role? Is it just as a, supportive ally? Are you all having any deeper conversations with, your kind of legislators or senators, congressmen in the area?
Yeah, I mean, it's an honor, first of all, to be considered, to have a seat at the table with these conversations happening. I'm not a lawyer. I'm not a politician. So I don't bring that to the table, and I'm not asked to bring it. The reason that we are invited to the table is because I have interviewed over 1,000 strangers about how much they make. And many of them have told me directly what experiences they're having in the workplace when it comes to transparency and what they'd like to see change in their companies and their work environments. So I bring a really valuable and unique perspective from the worker side. I represent workers and I represent those that are hoping to be fairly compensated, which is all of us. I think that that's a lot more valuable than, knowing what clauses and terms to include in the law. We need to talk to the workers and what they want, not what business owners want or politicians.
So to that end, you'll have grown your business outside of just doing street interviews in the last 2 years. And so do you mind kind of telling us a bit about how you've done that?
When I found out that I was underpaid and I was doing my market research, one of the issues that I came across in many of the sources that I looked at, Glassdoor, Indeed, the big names, is when I looked up, senior data analysts in the DC metro area, how much do they make? The answer I got was an aggregated result from probably 20,000 data points that they have. And that average that they gave me didn't tell me anything. It didn't help me at all in my market research. It didn't give me a firm answer. It didn't give me the context that I needed. And so when we started Salary Transparency, I realized not only can we do these interviews, but we can actually solve a really big problem in the market research space and the job board space. And it's by creating a salary database that works for workers and actually helps them. It's a very simple solution how we've done that. So if you go to salarytransparency.com, our salary database is live. You can search any job title and get every individual response from everybody who has submitted their salary in our database. You get to see their individual response, which includes based on what information people have or haven't provided. But at the most, you get their years of experience, their education, their industry, their company, their job title, all these really important factors that were missing when I was doing market research that would solve all those gaps today. And you can search through so many different salaries to really make sure that you are finding out whether you are fairly compensated or not. We're also launching a job board that only lists jobs that include pay. And we filter through them to make sure that it's solid pay. It's not like a 0 to 200K range, this terrible job range. So we're building the tools to help workers search for transparent jobs, but also find the information they need to be fairly compensated.
Well, I think this is just so fascinating because people think that if you say that you kind of had your break on TikTok or as a content creator, there's probably this stereotype of what you are doing. But then there are individuals who are actually providing real change and real solutions to problems and challenges. And I just think that that's really commendable. And also a good insight into kind of this world where there's, not everything is what you may think it might be. So we're going to talk. We're going to kind of dive in a bit more on that database and the resources you have a bit later. But in our next episode, I actually want to spend some time learning more about your creative process and the tools you use. Well, that's it for today's episode of The Rough Draft. Be sure to rate and subscribe in order to stay up to date with the latest episodes and visit rev.com/podcasts for even more content. Thank you for listening, and we look forward to seeing you again on the next episode of The Rough Draft.